Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to King's College London. I'm Professor Evelyn Welsh, the Vice Principal for Arts and Sciences here at King's, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to this inaugural lecture. This lecture is the last in a series of remarkable inaugurals which we've enjoyed during the Arts and Humanities Research Institute organised Festival of Arts and Humanities here at King's, and it's been an astonishing week, 10 days. I'd just like to invite you all to one event after this, after we've had some amazing ideas about medieval France, about silk, and heard some singing, had a glass of wine. You can come out into the quadrangle to see Bending Light, a project organised by the festival with the Guildhall School of Music and Drama there. And at 8 o'clock there'll be a digital projection on the side of the buildings in the quad there. So with one or two glasses of white wine inside you, you might see really something quite extraordinary. And I warmly recommend that you attend that, because that will be the last showing in this festival. All of this wouldn't be possible, and as this is the last inaugural and the last time I'll be appearing on this stage there, I'd like to say a special thanks to Professor Mac Saunders, who runs the Arts and Humanities Research Institute, to Pelagia and to her team, Laura, Alex and Abby, for organising hundreds of events, hundreds of people, and making sure that we are all in the right place at the right time. So before we go to our main event, can I just ask you to thank Pelagia and her team? Now, I mentioned the white wine. There will be red and soft drinks as well. After the lecture, you are all very welcome to a reception in the Chapters restaurant, and there will be students outside to lead you to the way. But now to the important things here. It's my real pleasure to chair this inaugural. Emma Dillon joined King's this year, and this must be a record between arrival and actually inauguration there. Usually, I think the last one I chaired, the first one I chaired, was about 10 years, 15 years between start and professing her chair there. We're delighted she's with us. She studied music at Oxford as an undergraduate and went on to complete a DPhil in 1998. She worked as a lecturer in music at the University of Bristol until 2000, when she moved to the United States to join the music department at the University of Pennsylvania, where she was first an assistant professor and then later a full professor, eventually becoming chair of the department there. She's also been a visiting professor at the University of California, Berkeley, and a member and visitor at the Institute of Advanced Studies in Princeton, and a visiting scholar at Corpus Christi College, Oxford there. She's the author of a number of remarkable texts, many of which you will all know well there. She has written Medieval Music Making in the Roman de Fauvel, Cambridge University Press, 2002, and The Sense of Sound, Musical Meaning in France, 1260 to 1330, Oxford University Press, 2012 there. I think it's very important, and absolutely keeping with King's ethos, that Emma's also won major teaching awards for her undergraduate and graduate teaching. She appears on Radio 3 and is a chair, program chair for the American Musicological Society, that complete, well-rounded academic who contributes in research, education, and support for the discipline, both nationally and internationally. And as part of her engagement with her undergraduates, she is going to be accompanied this evening by some of the members of the music department, which I think is just going to be a remarkable inaugural lecture there. So can I now invite Professor Dillon to deliver her inaugural lecture at King's, Song, Silk and Romance, The Values of Medieval Music. Emma Dillon.
Before I begin, I would like to offer a few words of thanks myself. First of all, to Professor Welsh for that very generous introduction. I also want to take this opportunity to thank my colleagues and students in the Department of Music and in the Centre for Late Antique and Medieval Studies. I joined King's in January, and I feel very fortunate to be working with such a talented and congenial group of people, and I want to thank you for making me feel so welcome. There are also some people who've known me a little bit longer here, family and friends, and I want to thank you for coming today and sharing this with me. My final thanks also opens onto the heart of what I want to talk about today. I'm very glad to be joining forces today with 3 students from the music department, Angus McPhee, Rebecca Jones, and Joshua Kruter. You will be hearing them sing twice, just excerpts during the lecture, and then they're going to close my talk with a performance of the songs I will be investigating today. In the first instance, I want to thank them and also my colleague David Trendle for their willingness to collaborate and experiment with the songs I'm going to talk about. Working with them and working around these songs that they're going to sing embodies the very best aspects of music making. That is, music making undertaken in a spirit of exchange, sociability, and cooperation. Music's capacity to forge connections here amongst performers, scholars, and audiences who gather to listen is part of its identity, part of what we cherish most about it. For the musicologist Christopher Small, these acts of collaboration and interaction in and around musical sound, what he terms musicking, are part of what define our humanity. Quote, "The fundamental nature and meaning of music lies not in objects, not in musical works at all, but in actions, in what people do. It is only by understanding what people do as they take part in a musical act that we can hope to understand its nature and the function it fulfills in human life. Whatever that function may be, to take part in a musical act is of central importance to our very humanness." Well, we're going to look at objects, but we're also going to engage in the spirit of musicking today, not just with music's living presence provided by singers, but also with the voices and texts which are very much harder to hear, if indeed they are audible at all. But in this collaborative mode, engaging with music and musicians past and present, now and then, I hope to shed light on some of the ways in which medieval song was once a gathering place for its own kind of musicking. My medieval collaborators are a group of poets, musicians, scribes, and readers of the 13th century from France, and without any further preamble, it is with their creations that we shall now engage. I begin with a scene familiar the Romance tradition over, a moment in which a smitten hero falls for a lady who is more often than not just out of reach. The scene I've chosen is an old French romance, Guillaume de Dole, also known as the Roman de la Rose, and a text is ascribed to the northern poet Jean Renart. Dating from the 1220s, the story is one of the earliest examples of a tradition of interpolating sung lyrics into Romance narrative, a tradition popular in France in the 13th and 14th centuries. Something like 60 such texts survive, represented in around 200 manuscript sources. Drawing on a repertory of troubadour and trouvère song popular from the 12th century on, Renart brings the familiar scenery of French medieval romance to life with a new reality effect, that of music. The story of a knight, an emperor, a lady wooed, wronged, and then vindicated, an evil seneschal, and the countless courtly scenes of feasting and tournaments follows a grand plan of French romance that would have been familiar from the older Arthurian tales. But there is a difference. The volume on the soundscape is turned right up, as once imagined soundtracks of courtly music making are now animated and audible in the narrative fabric of the text. Guillaume de Dole is exemplary of some of the ways in which songs were put to work. They were cued as communal entertainment and soundtrack to feasting and ceremony, as emotional exchange between characters, and very often as the expressive outpouring of inner thoughts and feelings. In this example, song invites the audience to hear right into the heart of a hero. I'm going to be joined by my singers at this point for the first example. So let me set the scene. We enter the story at dawn. The previous night, the Emperor Conrad has heard tell from his trusty jongleur, or juglet, of a beautiful Leonore and her brother, Guillaume de Dole. So utterly smitten is Conrad by visions that Juglet conjures of Leonore, that before the evening is out, he has dispatched messengers to make contact with his now heart's desire. In this scene, Conrad is finally alone, left there by Nicola, his henchman, alone with his thoughts and feelings. He wakens to a sunny morning, and as light streams into his bedchamber, he realizes the new content of his heart, Leonore. He is moved to express himself, and as he falls in love, he lapses into song and sings the following strophe, and you can follow along here in the performance.
Some time after Nicola's departure, the emperor woke up. He asked that a window be opened. His samite's coverlet sparkled in the sunlight. It was trimmed with sable and embroidered with golden roses. For love of the fair Leonore, whose name was lodged in his heart, he began this song. Et nous signors laissemos chanter, et mes chants que me fait d'une amorette, si tous présentes que ne l'ose refuser. Oh, mes dieux en terre, que c'est jamais mon cœur et mon pensée. Tiens, la foi entre mes pas nuées, parce que j'aille.
It is a strange song for one falling in love, anticipating departure outre-mer from a lady who Conrad has not even met yet. I shall return to the detail of the song presently, but for now I will focus on matters more material and the curious alignment here of tangible and intangible pleasures. The gleam of sunlight lights up the coverlet of sable-trimmed samite. Samite is a form of embroidered silk and was one of the most luxurious fabrics available in this period. It is the sensual and highly tactile provocation for that most immaterial of substances, song. In fact, it is one of a number of such alignments of song and material objects in this romance and others like it in the ensuing tradition. Elsewhere in Guillaume de Dole, singers in Conrad's courts are rewarded with squirrel-lined cloaks and dainty brooches. Ladies sing as they weave, and members of Conrad's court settle themselves down on fur blankets to enjoy the pleasures of musical performance, all described in exquisite detail, offering vicarious pleasures for the fashion-forward reader. Renart was aware too of the relationship of song to things, and in a famous prologue to this work developed an elaborate material metaphor accounting for song's presence in the story. He likens the inserting of songs to the addition of red dye to a fabric, adding value and honor to the work. Just as one puts red dye into cloth to increase its worth, so he has added songs and sounds to this the romance of the rose. I would like to use this sensual correspondence between silk and song in Renart as an entry point for some larger questions about song's relationship to the material cornucopia of romance. Romance draws music into a world of objects whose values can be calibrated and inventoried according to established economies. Strewn with objects of extraordinary potency, from embroidered gowns to swords to roses to precious jewels, as well as with more humdrum items, cutlery and spinning wheels, the things in romance serve multiple functions as social indicators, marks of monetary value, but also as expressions of deep desire, affection and gratitude. In thinking a way into this communicative aspects of things, it will be useful to consider some more recent writing by cultural anthropologists and historians of science, those who study the ways objects work in a given society and the mechanisms by which they accrue value and meaning. We think with the objects we love. We love the objects we think with. This quote comes from the introduction to Sherry Turkle's collection, Evocative Objects, Things We Think With, and seems a sympathetic starting point for contemplating the potential value of objects in romance. It calls attention not only to the importance of objects in the way that people think their way in the world and navigate the environment, but also to the effective relationships that exist between people and objects. Daniel Miller, in his book Stuff, likewise argues that far from being in opposition to us, inanimate to our animate, or symbols that stand in or represent us, quote, in many cases, stuff actually creates us in the first place. Things talk, too, according to Lorraine Daston, and they hold forth on their gamut of topics. Listening to the objects in romance may, paradoxically, afford us a way to listen into dimensions of music that are all but muted by the great distance of history. This aligning of song and things in romance permits a rare insight into some notoriously elusive aspects of the history of song. In particular, it invites consideration of what kinds of values medieval audiences and creators attach to song, and provoked by what kinds of musical effects. This is particularly inviting as an aspect of song's history to pursue. As well as adding to the understanding of the quantifiable practical economies of song, the cost of performers and manuscripts transmitting song, for example, romance offers a way to explore values pertaining to emotional effect or experience, what the historian Barbara Rosenwein has called one of the invisible histories of medieval culture. More importantly, the materiality of romance paradoxically facilitates a kind of purchase on that most fragile, tricky of substance that musicology has to contend with, namely song's sound. So let me take you now back into the environment of romance and to another example of sonic revelation. In this case, you will notice not only how densely furnished the scenery is, but also how song itself seems to acquire a more physical, tangible presence in the story. As a contrast to the scene of Conrad's first awakening of love, we're going to move now to a happy ending, one whose outcome is both sealed and fated with a song. It occurs in Guillaume de Machaut's Remède de Fortune, an interpolated text by one of the most celebrated poet-composers of the 14th century. The Remède, which dates from the 1340s, is an interesting staging post in this tradition of inserting song into narrative, since Machaut was highly self-conscious of the traditions out of which he was writing. His work has a quasi-historical feel to it, as he assembles and curates a range of sources and influences, romance amongst them. Reading Machaut read lyric interpolated romance, then, offers precious insights into how early audiences of texts like Guillaume de Dole construed the presence of song in the story. The Remède concerns the story of a young lover who, smitten with a beautiful lady, the epitome of courtliness, attempts to express himself through a series of failed lyric suits. The story maps his progress from disastrous crooner to suave and sophisticated songster, and a series of pep talks and singing lessons from Lady Hope intervening that help to bring his quest for love to fruition. In the course of the story, his songs become progressively more modern, both in terms of their compositional style and their notation. And it's with the final song, A Rondelet, the cutting edge of musical fashion, that I'm going to be concerned. We'll join him at the end of the story. Here, primed by lessons from Lady Hope, the lover is finally ready to present himself to his beloved in her court. Whoops. He enters her castle dwelling, and you see him on the right here, and straight into a Disney-like rendition of the archetype landscape of romance. The illuminators of this manuscript, Manuscript C, for those who know the Machaut manuscripts, will some that I'm going to use here, realize every detail of this scene in lavish detail. He sees before him, quote, meadows and little fountains in which there were ladies, knights and maidens and a great company of other people dancing gaily amidst great joy and festivities. There is a soundtrack, too, of delightful, bright, courtly songs. And he approaches his beloved, who then puts him through some rigorous paces of romantic behavior, with an invitation first to dance and then to sing. Following an exchange of songs, the lady, satisfied by his attempts, finally accepts his suit and invites him deeper into her court. After a mass, lavish feasting, music-making and celebrating, the lovers seal their union. The lady now turns to more conventional signs of acceptance, and the two exchange rings to mark their agreement. Song, though, proves a more effective agent and witness to love's success, and the lover follows up this exchange with a polyphonic rondelet, or rondeau, the final song of the story. It seems to have a magical effect, and the lover is admitted to yet another scene of courtly celebration. And he looks out now onto a vista of something like a hallucination of a centuries-old scene, reminiscent of the earliest romances of Chrétien de Troyes. Quote, everyone was finding great pleasure in arms, love, merriment, jousting, tournaying, and every other pastime. And we can see him at the left in this manuscript image, depicting a song scroll, falcon-like. Singers want to join me again. Before going any further, we will listen to an extract of this song. You have the text overhead, and we're going to listen just to the portion, the first two lines, which are highlighted in red. This is the raw material, musically, of the whole song. In fact, it provides the entire music of this piece. The remainder, which we will hear at the end of my talk, is made up of recurrences and repetitions of this matter. So it's a good moment for you to put this into your ears and perhaps inscribe it on your hearts. And just keep in mind, it's a narrative feat. It's a song sung just by one character, but written in 3 parts. My lady, my heart stays with you, although I myself must leave you. It's quite a hard act to follow, the singers, I have to say. So, thank you. As noted earlier, the rondelay marks a successful conclusion of an extended music lesson, and in a compositional sense, it is the most modern of the set of 7 songs of the Remède. You just heard a little taste of why. It is most apparent in the intricate rhythmic work of the individual voices and in the extremely complex ways that they relate and weave in and out of one another's musical space. It was also a highly unusual effect for its time, and as the earliest of Machaut's rondeaus, there's very little that we can compare this song to. Exactly what it is about the effect, beyond its modernity, that signals its lauded status and gives it its special powers, is what I would like to explore next. But let me now point out some other properties of the song. It is caught up with some well-established conventions for ascribing value to things in romance. As we saw, song is linked to the activity of gift exchange of 2 rings. It recalls a familiar economic model of the period, and one often witnessed in romance. In his contribution to apardurize the social life of things, Patrick Geary explains that medieval gift-giving was, quote, not just the acquisition of commodities, but the establishment of bonds between giver and receiver, bonds that had to be reaffirmed at some point by a countergift. Gift exchange is just one way in which romance appropriates and adapts established mechanisms by which things accrue value and forge connections. And the ring exchange may also allude to just such a system of values, while its transaction seems to draw the song into its world. In a purely metaphorical sense, the aligning here of the recognizable gift exchange and a musical offering is a simple enough way to valorize the lover's creation. Ties between the final rondelay and the ring exchange, though, are even more precise and mark the song out as even more precious. For the rondelay, as its designation implies, has a circular form that mimics the round rings themselves. It is a ring in a musical sense, and we heard the portion of the music which is going to return and cycle around and around in this piece. In the appropriation of song into the system of gift exchange, song too is thus positioned as a thing with which a thing with value in the economy of other things, even if we're not quite sure exactly what properties of song constitute its particular currency yet. Other elements contribute to the impression of the song's materiality as a thing proffered and received. The lover's rondelay is visible here in 2 senses, as that brandished scroll, and also as musical notation, filling up parchment space. The concern with what song is, visible, invisible, material, immaterial, harks back to some earlier scenes, such as this one, where Lady Hope, who sings an exemplary song to the lover, is seen vanishing into the bushes, receding as her own voice decays. Meanwhile, the lover we see the lover's committed listening is depicted as an act of writing. Though the lady and her performance are lost, they endure in the song's physical presence, which in turn is a kind of physical manifestation of its emotional impact, never to be forgotten. It is against this backdrop that we must read the cues of the lover's rondelay, a triumphant act of presence of what is always bound to vanish. In presenting these detailed accounts of Guillaume de Dole and the Remède de Fortune, I hope I've given you a feel for the characters and scenarios of the French Romance tradition and a taste of the music that seems to bring that habitat to life. For the musicologist, romance seems to have an almost ethnographic potential. It records song in a variety of narrative and social contexts. It gives it a habitat. Its literary shrine seems to add to the sense of it actually being there, to be lifted back out of the voices of characters and plots, and heard as if its presence was still sounding on parchment, a potential that the beautiful sung interpolations into my text today seem to confirm. But this tradition also exaggerates one of the most difficult aspects of working not only with this evidence, but with really any evidence relating to the history of musical sound. And stepping back now and joining a larger chorus of scholars in my field, from philosophers to analysts to ethnomusicologists, let me state that the fact remains that sound and performance as historical matter is, in the age before recordings, irrecuperable. We cannot hear what they heard, we cannot sing what they sang, and no performance is ever, in any case, the same twice. Romance, which seems so poised to make song available again, is particularly tantalizing with regards to performance. On the one hand, its very originary purpose, as set out in Renart's prologue, was its role to remember song. Yet at the same time, it seems to fashion itself as an archive or medieval hard drive for music. It also seems to offer much less prescriptive information than other sources of this period. Machaut's elegant notated texts, which yield to deciphering and resolution in modern performance, tend to be the exception rather than the rule in this tradition. More often, scribes inserted text only in chippets of songs or cued the presence of song with a visual sign such as red ink, decorated capitals, or by underscoring the text, as in these two examples. In cases such as Guillaume de Dole, which offers just text in chippets, we can supply the notated versions for some of the songs by reference to later notated chansonniers. So while the opening words of Conrad's song are all that remains in the sole source, manuscript source of Guillaume de Dole, the words of the first strophe, that is, at least 9 other notated versions survive elsewhere. In chansonniers, sorry, there's a little detail of the song, in chansonniers that are devoted exclusively to the collection of songs. It is perhaps because of this lacuna that the repertory of interpolated romance has occupied only a peripheral position in the mainstream of musicology. And in fact, the tradition exists sort of in the disciplinary borderland, neither quite the domain of musicology on account of its missing notation, while the presence of song in the romance sets it somewhat apart from the mainstream romance tradition. But the absence of notation is only an extreme exaggeration of a problem facing anyone in search of the sonic past. Even the most intricate notated folio is not the sound or the performance itself. But that, I think, was well understood by early scribes of these and other sources. And to understand its absence from the manuscript tradition as a lack of concern about song's audible substance is to greatly underestimate what these works can tell us about music's originary audible impact. Likewise, to presume that the notated sources have greater authority as informants on performable sound is to overestimate their status, perhaps. In fact, as I hope may be starting to become apparent, romance may have a great deal more to say about musical sound than some of the notated chansonniers do, but just not in ways that we might traditionally think of. We need to keep in mind also a point that artist Butterfield has made, that is, that when the copying and codifying of troubadour and trouvère songs began in the mid-13th century, it started not in the notated songbooks, but in fact in these early romances like Guillaume de Dole and the Roman de la Violette. In a culture where the tradition of vernacular song was generally not yet visible or visualizable, the Romance context, as Renart takes pains to explain in that prologue, performed an extraordinary task of creating a technology by which song could become durable, or in his words, be cast into a story pour remembrance, for memory. Romance was thus about a miraculous kind of work, codifying song and giving sound some kind of presence. Thus, while the partial notation, the reading or the underlining, may in one sense be incomplete as records, in another they are fully formed accounts of these songs. The questions need to be reorientated, I think, and the evidence prompts the possibility for a new way of listening to these records, not as a prescription of sound, but as a mark of its effects and meaning. What may thus seem a limitation may in fact be an opportunity, but to realize this opportunity requires a kind of flexibility on our part and a willingness to historicize the most fundamental nature of musical sound itself, what it is for, and where it resides. And here, romance itself offers an eloquent model for what this kind of flexibility might look like. For romance and song exist in a benevolent relationship to one another in this tradition. They exhibit reciprocity, are mutually illuminating, and together they work to forge meanings and values in these stories. The material itself encourages a similar kind of benevolence and reciprocity on the part of the scholar, I think, to listen across fields and to entertain questions that are perhaps beyond an originary training. It invites an approach to evidence undertaken in the spirit of romance, and also in the spirit of musicking with the past. And there's every reason to endeavour to try this, for it is also in the spirit of this festival to place central matters of song that are the most important, to recall small that are most central importance of our very humanness. Song, sounding effects, the values those involved with those effects forge through participation, that is of central importance to our very humanness. That is, songs, sounding effects, and the values that those are involved in producing those effects are forged through its creation. Musicking with romance, be it as a scholar, be it as a singer, scribe, writer, or audience, taps into values most abundantly precious to all of us. And so in the spirit of romance and in this act of musicking, I'm going to return now to the connections that romance invites between song and things, and to listen to some chatty objects and what they might have to say about song. The little sequence that follows derives from many objects which are actually in the British Museum, and I wanted to include them so that you might perhaps go and peruse them yourselves afterwards. We see here an enamel box now housed in the British Museum. Produced in Limoges and Aquitaine around 1180 and contemporary with the Arthurian romances of Chrétien. It positions a scene of chivalry on the left-hand side, familiar in romance, and it's at right angles to a panel depicting a troubadour singing his heart out to a lady, and they share this space with another scene of woo to the right. As well as foreshadowing the musicalization of romance, this box also connects to an aspect of the tradition whereby romance is turned into things, is quite literally a desirable object and part of the scenery of the environments of its cultivation. These objects of romance appear in all sorts of places. These are just a few to sequence through. Carved ivory boxes, they can also be the decorations on combs. And there are also, this is a much later example, manuscripts of romances themselves become a kind of treasure. This is a 15th century book, the Tolbert Shrewsbury book, which contains romances given to Margaret of Anjou on her marriage to Henry VI. And it depicts the book within the book here, offered as a lavish treasure. Romance is a luxury backdrop in a literal sense sometimes. In this example from Palazzo d'Avanzati, these are 14th century wall paintings of the 13th century Roman de Châtelain de Vergy, which is an interpolated romance. With romance spawning itself as an actual treasure or collateral, then, it is easy enough to put a value on the genre in its environments of consumption. Many of these objects were ascribed monetary value in inventories, some kept in strong boxes in treasuries. But romance itself does quite a lot to reinforce not just the fiscal worth of things, but also the cultural and aesthetic premium of the genre, since the stuff of romance is frequently the stuff in romance. The porous relationship between the world of romance and the environment of its production yields to fascinating collisions of fiction and reality. Characters in romance are caught reading romances. There's an example of the heroine in the Provençal text Flamenca, who is locked up in her turret by a jealous husband and has for company, amongst other things, a romance, the Roman de Blanchefleur. Meanwhile, the combs, caskets and troths we just saw appear all over the place as tokens of desire and affection, as well as payment within Romance stories. This meshing of fiction and reality also pertains to practical dimensions of song-making. Records from the early 14th century household of the Capetian kings read a little bit like an inventory of characters and objects of romance. Consider, for example, the household ordinances of Louis X, dating from 1315. Listed amongst the chevaliers, the chamberlains, the clerks and chaplains, all of whom appear in romances too, there were also 6 minstrels. Meanwhile, the household inventory of his wife, Clémence, includes luxury items of silk, curtains, furs, embroidered clothes, while her library too includes popular romances, chansonniers, as well as a roman de chansons notées. Imagine for a moment that that roman was Guillaume de Dole, where Jouglet, the jongleur, is called on by a king to tell stories and sing songs and offer advice and comfort to his lord. Or that it was the Roman de la Violette, which is set in the court of another King Louis, in which the hero, Gérard, returns to court at one point disguised as a minstrel, offering service as a singer. There are many ways to understand the circulation and materialities of romance, but we should not resist the most literal, to consider the effect of reading romance in situ, in environments littered with accoutrements, scene setters, and sometimes even characters familiar from these stories. These mirror worlds within romance may contribute to what Daniel Miller, who draws on the work of sociologists and art historians, considers the frame effect or humility of stuff, whereby, quote, objects are important not because they are evident and physically constrain or enable, but quite the opposite. The less we are aware of them, the more powerfully they can determine our expectations by setting the scene and ensuring appropriate behavior without being open to challenge. Understood in this way, the stuff of romance is in part a cue that determines expectations, while the shuttling of things between the interior world of romance and its living environments suggests the uncanny possibility that the wild from time to time might resemble the fictional, and vice versa. Romance is familiarized and familiarizing of its lived environments, in part through these props. Within this system of things, some are endowed with particularly expressive functions. In fact, some of them even have their own voices. In Guillaume de Dole, Leonore turns a beautiful gold seal of a letter sent by Conrad into a brooch for herself. It could have stirred connection to this object, which is a contemporary English gold ring brooch, again in the British Museum. And it is inscribed on the back with these words, Je suis ici en lieu d'ami amour. I'm here in place of a friend's love. Here then is a thing with a voice, a thing that speaks or maybe sings, in this instance, of an absent love. In many cases in Guillaume de Dole, these verbose objects engage directly in conversation with song. For example, when Conrad rewards Jouglet for his song-like description of Leonore, Conrad takes out a cloak to reward his jongleur, saying, "You have earned it." And now forgive me a little kind of interlude of fantasy, pulling from some contemporary images of what these might have looked like. Then, after Guillaume de Dole's arrival at Conrad's court, the young knight returns to his lodgings with Jouglet for a lavish bestowing of gifts on his hosts. Sleeveless tunics lined with squirrel furs and still fragrant with the scent of dye are bestowed on the chamberlain in exchange for his lodgings. I could not find such an item. The innkeeper's wife lands a beautiful brooch and her husband a new cloak, again scented with dye. Finally, he gives the young lady of the group his own silver-trimmed belt, quote, to reward her for singing this new song to Jouglet's accompaniment. And then there follows a stanza of an unattributed song. The song in question supports this congruence of songs and things, as it describes a girl washing her dress while thinking of love. Other songs imported to Conrad's court likewise emphasize the luxury environment. Characters sit on their samite coverlets and admire songs about beautifully adorned maidens, as the cycle of life imitating art, imitating life continues. The things in romance, then, with their multiple systems of value and meaning, serve as a way to think about music. So now it's time to listen to what Silk might have to say to and about song. And so to end, I'd like to return to the songs of the lovelorn emperor and the jubilant lover, and offer some tentative suggestions about what meanings of song sound in these texts. First, to the pivotal scene in Guillaume de Dole. Conrad's song, expressing love for a lady has yet to meet, is not attributed in Guillaume de Dole as some others are. However, it is ascribed in later sources to the Châtelain de Coucy, a northern trouvère active in the late 12th and early 13th centuries. His songs were amongst the most widely copied of the early trouvères, while their presence in a number of early romances, and in actually a romance dedicated to the life of the Châtelain, suggests his esteemed reputation and renown. The complete song, telling of love for, rejection by, and then ultimate separation for a lady by the call of crusade, is patently not the emperor's story. But by singing this song, Conrad too is imbued, perhaps ironically, perhaps sincerely, with the lofty spirit of a lover crusader. Well, these lines of inquiry are fine, but they don't actually account much for the songish dimension of the song, what the sound that issues from his fin cœur signifies. So here, gathering silk, sunlight, and evidence of those later notated sources around song unveils possibilities for how that more slippery aspect of musical performance may play its part. What did silk mean to an early 13th century audience? This is an example of some medieval samite. Drawing on evidence of the trade in samite and on sumptuary laws, it's possible to recuperate some sense of its value in real terms, indexed by the realities of trade and laws governing limits of cloth acquisition. Gold-embroidered samite fringed with fur was a rarity, and it was most likely imported at this time, possibly from Islamic Spain or Constantinople. It was a kind of material reserved for special rites of passage, a dowry, say. In some regions, copious quantities of this fabric would have been literally prohibited. Sarah Grace Heller's work on sumptuary legislation in the Languedoc offers fresh context for another silk-laden text, the Provençal text Flamenca. Read against contemporary legislation prescribing the quantity of luxury cloth citizens and merchants in the region were permitted to sell and own, the abundance of cloth in Romance would have been understood as prohibitively excessive, indeed even illicit. The inner worlds of Guillaume de Dole and a text like it offered readers a space to fantasize a cornucopia that was for many, in reality, out of reach. Returning to Conrad's song, an early reader might have experienced that coverlet as beyond their means and associated with certain rarefied context. Conrad's singing was likewise correspondingly rare. Singers and songs of this kind were scarce commodities. Readers of romances may have known the songs, but many may not have heard them, or at least not very often. The song might have been sumptuous then in the sense of being excessive or out of the ordinary, entirely fitting for this moment of emotional reckoning. The interplay of material values and song here becomes one way to articulate, perhaps even to calibrate, the expressive meanings associated with song. So now to the distinctive features of the song. And the strangest, most distinctive feature of this song is anticipation not only of sensual pleasure of love, but also the loss of love through rejection and departure. While in one sense a strange narrative mismatch at the moment of Conrad's awakening love, it is in another sense it embodies the very essence of courtly love and the song's relationship to loving. From the earliest utterances of the troubadours, love was defined through the paradox of its inevitable loss. Song after song repeat the cycle of loving ladies who are remote, unavailable, and disinterested. Conrad's adoption of this lyric thus places him in lauded company of troubadours past. But Conrad's, or the Châtelain's song, emphasizes at its opening another vital component of loving. That is, that to love is also to sing. The season and the birds bid him do so here, for he is in love. His song begins with love and ends with loss and rounds the eternal cycle of medieval love songs. Loving, losing, and singing are always connected. Time and again, the song tradition highlights love's innate affinity with vocal expression. And little wonder, while love is evanescent, fleeting, passing, giving way to loss, so, of course, is singing. In this moment, what moves the Conrad or the Châtelain to sing is not just the desire to sing about love. Rather, he may sing because loving is like singing, both resulting in a kind of loss. This is also, interestingly, a meaning of song and performance that the notated sources may seem to clarify. The 9 sources testify to the popularity of this song, but not by affirming its authoritative, unchanging version. In fact, they tell a tale of quite considerable variance. This degree of discrepancy is not uncommon at all in this repertory. And it could be explained by any number of scenarios, to lost originals, to a fluidity of song in a memorial culture, to broken lines of transmission. But it points too to the possibility that transformations in performance were a given. Or, put another way, that in which melody's identity was bound explicitly to the moment of its reenactment. Sung back to back, in fact, these 9 versions of the song reinforce not so much its stable elements, we're aware of those, but it's the variety and small ornamental transformations and melismatic turns that this song accommodates that may be interesting here. Again, these are not new observations, just perhaps another way of thinking about them. The evidence of romance seems to reframe their significance. The chansonniers are informed by this, the earlier setting of the song in Guillaume de Dole. When Conrad stirs himself to sing, it is with the understanding that it will simultaneously be like and unlike other incarnations of this song, an experience exhilarating, risky, and unrepeatable. And it is this evanescence, the song as love, that the presence of shimmering silk witnesses to and helps to record. And when Angus sings this, he's going to experiment a little with some changes to the line endings and the ornaments and the melismas. Romance's facility to mark the emotional values of song resurfaces in a different way in the Lover's Rondelet. The things in the Remède too signal the rondelet as a kind of expressive excess. We've seen one example of such a material cue as to the value of song in the exchange of rings and their affinity to the circular form of song. But as we approach this ending of the Remède, it is as if the whole scenery of the story suddenly clutters up as more and more lavish props appear to fill out the landscape. Just before the ring exchange, after the lover's admittance to mass and to feasting, the author describes a scene of luxury that is characterized by hyperbolic excess. Messengers and stable boys are setting up benches, trestle tables, and accoutrements for dinner. Quote, "It was quite a sight to see them hurrying to and fro, bringing rushes, spreading rugs, shouting, hollering, sweating. It was bedlam to hear them call to one another in French, Breton, German, Italian, English, Occitan, and Norman. It was a marvel to see everywhere carvers arranging, polishing, decorating, straightening things, slicing bread, calling for tablecloths, another scrubbing of dirt. And then later, after the meal, you should have heard seen the musicians arrive, all combed and comfortably attired. They played various harmonies. For their all in a circle, I saw a vielle, guitar, lute, Moorish guitar, small psaltery, cittern, the psaltery, the harp, tabor, trumpets, knackers, portative organ, more than 10 pairs of horns, and so on. This superabundance of an environment, and one in which things now so patently start to resonate, sing, and play out their values, speaks of a similar kind of hyperbole attached to the final rondelet. And a closer look reveals at how this song is drawn into this habitus and contributes to by all possible means. I'll touch on just a few aspects to conclude. Let me start locally, circling around the particularities of the song. Most obviously, the song, as I said, is a superhuman feat. It's written for 3 voices, yet is it to be imagined in the narrative as sung by the one single voice of the lover. It's also a feat of technology, especially when read against the earlier, older genres of the story. The rondelet exerts its modernity in part through its notation. It inhabits a song space that is packed with state-of-the-art notation. Here, you see it through bristling stems. This is a very different kind of notation than the early songs in the story. It's also a kind of musical composition that we might say is more parchment-reliant. That is, that requires some kind of written instantiation for its creation, composition, much more so than earlier songs, which might have travelled parchment-free in the memory. And it is also a song space that is given a visible presence by... it is also a song space that gives visible presence to a remarkable musical effect. You can see this here, in fact. There are very few words in this song, and this is another byproduct of the notational technology that can sustain elaborate, melismatic musical lines without the support of words. And this leads me to some impressions of the kinds of sound these signs represent. The notation guides a musical effect that is something like the implied hubbub of the gathering around this song in the Remède. The voices sometimes let go of words for long passages of melismatic pleasure, particularly towards the endings of lines. This is intensified by the range and relationship of these three voices. They constantly move in and out of one another's musical ambitus. They're very tightly connected in terms of the range that they cover. So much so that there are many moments where the upper voices, that will be what Rebecca and Josh will be singing, frequently interact and overlap. The sense of three lines thus gives way to at various points, and in these moments of indistinguishability of lines, the texture creates the effect of one single remarkable voice, unlike any voice that could talk. I'm calling on the music to speak here, to represent itself as a historical fact. But let me ask of this effect another question. If there is a musical voice here, what does it have to say? These few observations of musical organization are all well and good on their own, but located within the Remède, amongst rings, feasting courtiers, musician hordes, and in the remembrance of Romance traditions past, I think new frequencies seem to open up for our listening, or at least for listening to the meanings of the song's effects in the story. Like Conrad's love song, the Lover's Rondelay presents love as loss. That is no coincidence, and in fact, for all this song is so modern in technique, its starting point is a short aphoristic refrain that really looks back to much older 13th century traditions. It carries also the older ideologies of love and the values of fin amour. My lady, he says, I give you my heart, but I myself am leaving you. In its musicalized form, as you will hear, the round form of the song means that in performance, this thought circles around again and again as if to put a groove in the memory, and sung by a voice superlative, almost superhuman in its effect. The true gift of romance to song and song to romance is that together they create a new kind of technology that allows the lover or the song to be true to its word, to leave the lady, the reader of the text, a record of his true feelings. Like Lady Hope, the lover may vanish, but his heart remains, no longer forgotten, but given a life of its own through the elaborate congruence of things and sounds. We think with the things we love, and we love the things we think with, says Sherry Turkle. For Machaut, the lover, the lady and his readers, singers, scholars, any of those who participate in this rondelay, the benevolent relationship of song to romance allows for song's most elusive, emotional, enduring values to linger in some fashion here. And the song that materializes at the end of the Remède is not just a thing to love, but it records there a thing with which to love. I'm now going to turn the story over to the singers to perform these two songs. Not to reinstate these performances as if they were the text that came springing from the manuscript. Rather, in making these songs their own, they're going to offer us another kind of sonic prompt, provocation, one that we might add to these other acts of scholarly musicking that I've endeavored to share with you today. Thank you.
ciela pluvae si lucete, jamais quidae ulimae ondire. Mi sedit vis et sabene buscete, et sive osil peretia et clair. Morum ans prisque molest oine, Las proquae demes iagade, ladis fians cifos amiano, cont demarit et genae condere, si doucement ne fut traidum, tant confimias ne me seriano, mais suissos si mosit raison, exes posse que lae a me, ni sed potreo choison. Siquam agedus camus sunt nella conesmo, se ne sunt la gente malere, nes pas ubi annus me dole swangerum, mes observam que di avoir mon nom. Lord, fil amor descuvet, et anus
Usually at these inaugurals we say a vote of thanks to the speaker. We will do that tonight as well. But first the speaker would like to give a vote of thanks to her singers there. And now, ladies and gentlemen, before we go downstairs to chapters for a well-deserved reception, I'd like to thank, on your behalf, Professor Dillon, for an imaginative, evocative, remarkably interdisciplinary, tactile, oral, inaugural lecture. It is a real sort of symbol of collaborative research in action, that Arts and Humanities at King's does so well. So can I invite us to thank our new professor, Emma Dillon.